VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
And thank you for joining us on Crosstalk here on the VCY America Network. My name is Jim Schneider, and just before we introduce our guest today, we have given a lot of coverage over the last several days and last week to the Supreme Court hearings going on pertaining to the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. Well, Liberty Counsel, Matt Staver, put out a press release earlier today just alerting us that now that the 3 days of oral arguments are finished, the next step is for the private conference of the justices that is scheduled for Friday, during which they will discuss the case, beginning with Chief Justice John Roberts, moving through the next most senior justice to the most junior justice, Kagan. Each will give his or her vote on each aspect of the case, and once the majority is determined, the most senior justice in the majority will assign the writing of the opinion. The writing will begin with the written opinion then expected in June. That's when we find out what this case is all about. But we at Crosstalk wholeheartedly encourage you to be praying, especially over this next 24-hour period as the conference will convene between the justices of the U.S. Supreme Court and continue throughout, because it's possible, and it's even happened before, that even as the writing of opinions goes on, that justices have switched votes in the past, and certainly this is a matter to daily uplift before the throne of grace. Well, parental rights are under attack. And I was astonished when I saw the headlines come through. First of all, WND, WorldNetDaily.com, state confiscates newborn over vaccinations. I then saw a story taking me then to HSLDA, where the story was entitled Newborn Seized in Hospital by Police and Social Worker. Joining us to talk about this issue today in the matter of parental rights is Michael Farris, the chairman of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. He's chairman and chancellor of Patrick Henry College, president of ParentalRights.org. It was since founding an HSLDA in 1983 that Michael Farris has used his extensive experience in both politics and appellate litigation to defend parental rights and help grow the organization to over 80,000 member families. He's written over a dozen books. Education Week has named him one of the top 100 faces in education of the 20th century. Michael, thanks for joining us today here on Crosstalk.
Jim, it's my pleasure to be with you again.
You know, as I mentioned, I was just astonished when I saw this headline come through WND and then looking at the HSLDA website about this newborn seized in the hospital by a social worker and police. And I'm wondering if you just take several minutes to help start our program today to tell us what is happening to a family in Pennsylvania.
Okay, great. The family's name is Scott and Jodi Ferris. Now, I'm Mike Farris, but they're Ferris, and I'm Farris, so we're not related. But Jodi went into labor a bit earlier, just a few days earlier than they expected it, and they weren't able to get to their connected with their midwife in a timely fashion, so they ended up in an ambulance headed to the hospital, and she gave birth in the hospital parking lot. It happens to people once in a while, and when she got there, as soon as the ambulance arrived, the medical personnel from the hospital came down and began tending to them, and as soon as she could, Jodi was asking, how's my baby, because they quickly scooped the baby up and took her off, and they gave the mom a shot, and then after giving her the shot, asked her, "Oh, you're not allergic to anything, are you?" They were in such a hurry. They were abrupt. They didn't ask questions, and the mom kept asking, "How's the baby? How's my baby? Can I see my baby?" And they were just ignoring her for a long time. And finally, one of the doctors told her that the APGAR score for the baby was 9, so the baby was doing fine, which is, it's a score that they give newborns at 1 minute and at 5 minutes, and apparently at 1 minute she was still in the ambulance. So I assumed that the one APGAR score was at 5 minutes, and the doctor says she was fine. Mm-hmm. Well, another doctor who found out that they were had planned to use a midwife and was really critical of them for that reason, said, no, your baby's very sick. You're going to have the baby stay in the hospital for a few days so we can make sure she's okay. And, so she was getting contradictory messages. One doctor says the baby's fine. The other says, no, it's very sick. And
wasn't she even told that the law required them to keep the baby at least 48 hours?
Yeah, that was, by mid-morning, that was kind of the story that they were telling, is that the law requires us to keep the baby here. And when they asked for the legal citation of that, the moms had some legal training, a little bit of legal training, and so she, asked for a copy of the law. They said, well, you'll have to talk to our risk management people. What it turns out is it's their standard practice, so they don't think that they will get sued for malpractice if they keep the baby. There's no law that the family has to obey. It's just them trying to protect their backsides. And so really all the things that were going on for the first several hours were running over the top of the family and refusing to answer questions, keeping the baby for extended periods of time, and giving conflicting information. And because of all these, the questions and so on, somebody in the hospital, we don't know exactly who it was, decided they needed the help of the social workers. And that's where things really went ugly. So the social worker showed up in kind of mid-afternoon and started wanting to, said that she was there to do an investigation. And Jodi said, what are you investigating? And she said, your refusal to treat the child. And she said, I haven't refused anything for the child. What are you talking about refusing to treat? Because at that point in time, they hadn't done anything. She'd asked questions about the hepatitis B vaccine, but she hadn't refused anything. They hadn't really, reached a conclusion on the hepatitis B. But in any event, that vaccine isn't a critical matter that has to be done in the first few hours of the baby's life. Mm-hmm. And so the social worker was just a bull in the china shop and was refusing to tell the reason for the investigation, was bullying the mom, and in the meantime, her husband had to go and deal with the other kids. So Scott had to go. They have older children. They'd put them with a neighbor, I believe it was, kind of as they rushed out the hospital early that morning. Toward the hospital early that morning, and they were now going to transfer them over to, I think, the grandparents' house. So Scott went to tend for a couple of hours with the other kids, and the social worker, during that time, came back in the room and started demanding that the mom sign this consent plan, which would effectively have given custody over, and control over to social services. If they didn't do what, if the Farris family didn't do what the social workers wanted, they would have power to intervene in the family's life. And Jodi had just given birth. She'd been through all this trauma. And her request was, I want my husband to read this. I don't want to sign it without my husband. Mm-hmm. And the social worker said, I've been here for several hours, and I don't care. I'm not going to wait any longer for your husband. And if you don't sign it right now, I'm going to call the police. And they talked back and forth for a little bit, and finally Jodi, afraid that she was going to seize the baby, said, okay, give it to me, let me look at it. And she said, it's too late for that, I'm going to seize the child, and left the hospital room, went and called the police, seized the child without a court order, consented to the hepatitis B vaccine. The child got the vaccine, and then the most outrageous part of all, they kicked the mom out of the hospital.
They what?
They kicked the mom out of the hospital, said, you have to leave. The police escorted her out of the hospital on the day she'd given birth because of this conflict over these issues, basically because she wouldn't sign the paperwork of the social worker at the time the social worker wanted it signed. With her just simply pleading, can we just wait till my husband gets back so he can read the papers? I'm in no condition to read the papers. So they kicked her out of the hospital. Her husband arrived just as they were wheeling her out the front door, and she ended up, because she needed to nurse the baby, they said that she could come back every 3 hours to nurse the baby, and they live quite a ways from the hospital. So she ended up spending that entire night in their car in the parking lot of Walmart, which was nearby. And it's the next morning there was a shelter care hearing, and a magistrate listened to the social worker's case and immediately dismissed it and gave the baby immediately to the family. So it's just the most outrageous birth experience I've ever heard in my entire life.
Absolutely outrageous. Now, I understand that the social worker, when calling the police, is it true that they said that this baby was suffering from illness or injury?
Well, that's what they have to say in order to seize the child, and that's what their paperwork said. And there was nothing wrong with this baby. The baby was fine. Now, the baby, once the hospital took her custody, they didn't take care of her correctly, and she developed jaundice. And so, and the baby ended up having to be hospitalized a second time a few days later because of the negligent treatment of the hospital on the jaundice, because the mom wasn't there to watch the baby carefully. Mom would have taken care of it, and she's got, other children. She knew what she was doing, but because the hospital was, bullying their way around, they really didn't take care of the child properly. It just shows that, most of the time, the vast majority of the time, moms do a better job than doctors in paying close attention to their child. And so there was no illness until the hospital introduced one a couple of days later.
Yeah, and I'd like you to underscore this, that the social worker took custody of the baby after calling police, and then it was the social worker that gave consent to this vaccination?
Correct. Yeah, the social worker says, now I am the child's temporary guardian. I have the power of the parent. I'm going to consent to medical treatment. And, all it was a hepatitis B vaccine, which, there was no emergency that the baby get that vaccination.
And didn't the mother in this case even suggest that she would be open to such a vaccination if it was warranted, meaning that you conduct a test in advance to know if this is necessary?
Correct. She said, test me, test the baby. Either of us have it, then fine. But it's a vaccination, so it's not going to treat hepatitis B if they already have it. And so it's, the doctors thinking that they had to hurry up here with the vaccination is just flat crazy. And so
tell us, what is the status of this case? How long ago did this happen?
Well, it's almost 2 years. It took us a while to get the paperwork from the hospital, and at least I didn't know about it until several months, maybe almost a year after it happened. But when it worked its way to me, I wanted to do the case, and so it's about 2 years ago that all this happened. But the lawsuit was just filed about 10 days ago,
okay.
And we filed a federal civil rights action against the hospital, against the social worker, against the police officers, against the doctors, and the others that were directly into the hospital risk management person who made a lot of the decisions along the way to protect the hospital. They were not concerned about this baby. They were concerned about the hospital.
We're talking today with Michael Farris from HSLDA and Chancellor and Chairman of Patrick Henry College and President of ParentalRights.org. We're going to find out after the break why a homeschool association is getting involved in this matter. We'll be back in just 1 minute. You're listening to Crosstalk on VCY America.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation author and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, where does marriage come from?
Chris, this is an interesting question because evolutionists have a different answer. They say that marriage among men and women is simply a societal thing. They point out that few animals mate for life, and since that kind of behavior got us where we are, then maybe we should model our behavior after the animal behavior. But the Creator of men and women also created marriage. In the beginning, He made them male and female, and saw that it was not good that man should live alone, but that the two should marry and become one flesh. He then declared it all to be very good. Those groups who try to downgrade marriage or redefine it will not succeed in bringing happiness. In most cases, it's best to find a mate and serve the Lord together. And that's the way it is from a Back to Genesis perspective.
For more information on the foundational principles set forth in Genesis, simply visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org.
I don't know about you folks, but in my opinion, this is absolutely outrageous how the social worker demanded for the signing of this paper to give them, authority over the child, and then summoning the police, saying that this child is suffering from illness or injury. They in essence take custody. The social worker then consents to this vaccination. This was not a life and death situation that is going on here. We're talking today with Michael Farris from HSLDA, the Homeschool Legal Defense Association, and one would ask, why would a homeschool association want to be involved in an issue like this pertaining to a newborn? Why are you taking the case?
Well, at one level, Jim, the answer is simply, it made me mad. And I wanted to help the family. But the bigger answer is this, that the right to homeschool is built on two basic legal principles. One is the right of parents to direct the upbringing of their children, and the other is religious freedom. And so we will, from time to time, when there is a major issue relative to one of those basic principles, take a case, even though it does not directly involve homeschooling. The high level of protection of parental rights is an essential attribute of what we stand for. And so we've actually had two medical cases now that we've done in the last few months. This one and a case in Michigan for Ken and Aaron Styler, whose son Jacob was being forced into having chemotherapy, even though they'd already done surgery to remove the tumor and they'd had several months of chemotherapy, but the doctors wanted to keep doing more after the boy tested cancer-free. And so we intervened in that case and defended that family's parental rights. And so, we've decided that we need to be more aggressive in defending broad areas of parental rights, and these two medical cases are our first two forays into that field.
Where, if we failed to act on issues like this, where is it all going to head?
Well, Hillary Clinton said it best. It takes a village to raise a child. She and her fellow village people believe that governments and professionals should decide how children are raised. In the chemotherapy case in Michigan, when I talked to the doctors and took their depositions, they talked to me, and they especially talked about the parents in the voice that a condescending kindergarten teacher uses. Now, if these people were just smart enough to understand this, they would follow us and do what we tell them to do. And it's dumb parents need to listen to the professionals and raise the children the way the professionals say. So the government and the village that goes with it wants to raise our children. They want to make all the decisions for our children. That's the impetus of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. That's the whole social worker mentality that they're trained in, and it's to a large degree what happens in the public school systems is the only people competent to raise children are these professionals, and it's a very low view of parenting. And if we don't stand up for parents' rights all the way around, parents' rights is just a really simple concept: who makes the decision? Who makes the medical decision? Who makes the educational decision? Who decides whether the child's old enough to have a Facebook account? Parental rights is a decision-making right. And when governments start invading that right to make the decision, thinking they can make better decisions than parents, no family is safe in this country.
Michael, you are a strong advocate for something known as the Parental Rights Amendment to our United States Constitution. What does this Parental Rights Amendment say?
Well, it has three sections. The first two are taken pretty much word for word out of Supreme Court decisions, one of which is about 90 years old, the other is about 50 years old. And the first section just simply says the liberty of parents to direct the upbringing and education of their children is a fundamental right. And that's the most important part of the law. And the Supreme Court, for better or for worse, has divided the constitutional rights of the American people into two categories, fundamental and non-fundamental. And as you can imagine from just the terminology, fundamental rights are given the highest level of protection, and non-fundamental rights get very little protection, in fact, almost no protection whatsoever. The government can invade your non-fundamental rights almost when they want to. But in the fundamental rights category, it's the ability of the government to invade your ability to make religious decisions, free speech decisions, right to keep and bear arms. All those things are considered fundamental rights. Well, the Supreme Court and lower courts are starting to erode the traditional standard of parental rights being a fundamental right. In fact, it was actually the very first right declared by the Supreme Court to be a fundamental right in the 1920s. And yet, we're losing that legal standard, and we're losing that high level of protection. And so the purpose of the Parental Rights Amendment is to take that principle that's currently an implied right in our Constitution and making it an explicit textual right. You put it in the text. Just like the Second Amendment is a textual right for the right to keep and bear arms, the Parental Rights Amendment would be a textual right for parents to make decisions for their kids, and that they can't water it down over time. So we say it's a high-level right, same level as free speech, freedom of religion, right to keep and bear arms. It's that level of right, not the right to own a blue car or to be a plumber or something like that, which the court views those kind of economic rights as low-level rights, which, my view should be a high-level right too, but, the Supreme Court has tubed a lot of our other rights, calling them non-fundamental.
What is it that our listeners, our people who are listening to Crosstalk today, what is it they can do concerning this matter of helping to carry the water, so to speak, on a parental rights amendment?
Well, they can go to the website of parentalrights.org and get on our email list and sign the petition and become supporters. They can also go to the HSLDA website and read about the case that we've been talking about here in Pennsylvania, and if they want to help with that specific litigation, there's a chance to help with this, sponsor that litigation. But we really the long-term fight here is to get parents' rights into the express text of the Constitution, and so I would really encourage people to go to the Parental Rights website and to get involved there. And it's pretty easy. There's several ways to get involved, from as simple as just signing an online petition and agreeing to call your congressmen and senators when we put out the call for calls and say, now's the time. The bill's moving, so please call. That's the simple level, and there's higher levels of involvement if people want to.
Now, specifically on this Pennsylvania situation, in which this newborn was seized by a social worker, who then consented to giving the child a vaccination, and at a hearing the next day, you mentioned that was it a judge or
was a magistrate?
A magistrate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Threw this thing out. You have filed action now pertaining to this, and where is this in county court?
It's in federal district court.
Federal district court,
right.
And any word as to when this is going to be coming up for arguments?
No. It'll be some time. We just got it filed.
But the question is, how many more situations like this will be occurring throughout this country up until the time that this is actually, going to be heard?
Well, from the reaction we've gotten on Facebook and other kinds of social media, this happens a whole lot more than we expected. I mean, threats to parents in the hospital are apparently almost a daily occurrence.
Wow.
I'm really surprised at the number of moms who've said on Facebook, something like this happened to me, something like this happened to my sister. This has really touched a chord with moms. And, a good mom asks questions about her child. A good mom says, why are we doing this? We had a family doctor who retired when he hit about 70-something, but he treated our family for a long time, and he used to say to us, I listen to moms because they know what's going on with their kids. And so, that kind of doctor is what we need. And the kind that wants to run over the top of moms, that's not what this country needs. And we need people who will let parents be good parents and not suffer legal threats and consequences, and the kind of draconian actions that they took here to this mom, kicking her out, making her sleep in her car overnight in the Walmart parking lot. I mean, to me, that's like the pinnacle of callousness that I've ever heard. And so
it's because we know best.
Yeah, we know best. We know how to ignorant parents think you know what you're doing, and it's just crazy.
Now, our listeners can read about this at the HSLDA website.
Right. Yeah, we have on the homepage on the left hand side that says "In the News." It's a top story on "In the News" on the homepage.
HSLDA.org. That stands for Homeschool Legal Defense Association. HSLDA.org. Michael, just very briefly too, there's another situation in Arizona where the U.S. Supreme Court has just refused to hear a case involving some social workers wanting to gain entry into a home.
Yeah. That was an unfortunate decision. The only good news is that the decision of the Ninth Circuit that we were appealing is not a published decision, so it technically doesn't set binding precedent. But the facts in that case were that a family had social workers and police officers at their door demanding entry, and they didn't have a warrant, they didn't have probable cause, they didn't have anything. They had an anonymous tip that was weeks and weeks old, and you don't have an emergency when you're dealing with a 2-month-old complaint, and it was about home construction issues. That was the issue, and the social workers said to the family, "If you don't let us in the home, we're going to seize your children." And the issue before the Ninth Circuit was whether or not, when you let social workers in on such a basis, whether you freely and voluntarily consented. And they held that consenting under that threat was free and voluntary consent, which is crazy. No parent in America who's told that if you take my kids, I'm going to, if you don't let me in, I'm going to take your kids. Mm-hmm. Nobody would believe that they had any freedom to truly choose. Oh, okay, well, I think I'll choose X. No, you know that a gun's just been put to your head. You might as well say, if you don't let me in, I'm going to shoot. And we may have to consider some legislation to overcome this decision, because it's a horrible decision.
Okay, so what do we do? What do you say to parents who are listening and they have such a knock that comes to their door?
Well, if they're members of HSLDA, the moment the dock's on the door, call us. Well, that's what we're here for. Mm-hmm. But I think that other families should make sure they understand their constitutional rights. And basically, it's this: unless the officials have a valid warrant from a court, or if they have probable cause evidence that there's an emergency going on, and an anonymous tip standing alone is not probable cause evidence, then they can't come into your house. And the question to ask them is there any basis for you thinking that I must consent? I mean, are you coming in regardless of my consent? And I would never tell them that I'm consenting. I would say something like, if you're coming into my house, you're coming in over my objection, and I'm not consenting, but I'm not going to get in your way. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to, give them any reason to say that you're resisting. Just say, I'm going to sue you for federal civil rights violations if you come into my house. That's the kind of approach that people need to take. But that's what HSLDA is there for. We get on the phone. We actually talk to the police over the phone when these things happen.
Michael Farris with us today. Let's open our phone lines. If you have a question pertaining to this case in Pennsylvania, or your thoughts pertaining to it, if you have a question about parental rights and the Parental Rights Amendment, get on board right now. 800-733-9829. 800-733-9829. You're listening to Crosstalk. We'll be right back.
Are you on death row? One Christian film producer says everybody is. Every one of us will one day die. Then what? In a heart-stirring 30-minute DVD, Film writer, producer, and director Dave Cristiano has released a penetrating onstage drama that takes you inside a prison cell and captures the life of a man on death row who knows that in less than 3 hours he will die. Convicted of murder, he sits angry, guilty, and scared. At his request for a preacher, the two engage in a soul-searching conversation that is forever impacting. As an evangelistic tool, VCY America is making available Death Row, encouraging you to share with unsaved friends and loved ones. One copy is available for a donation of $8, or you can obtain a 4-pack of the Death Row DVDs for a donation of $20. This offer will expire at the end of March. To make your donation by phone, call 1-800-729-9829 and specify whether you want 1 or 4 Death Row DVDs. That's 1-800-729-9829.
Folks, whether you realize it or not, parental rights are under attack. Now, it may start out small in some area, but it has grown to the point now where a newborn has been seized by a social worker and called police in right there in the hospital. The mother expelled from the hospital. HSLDA taken the case. You can read about it at hslda.org. But if you have a comment you'd like to make, a question pertaining to this specific case, or a like issue perhaps that you're going through, or issues pertaining to parental rights, pick up your phone, give us a call, 800-733-9829. That's 800-733-9829. We're going to begin in the state of Pennsylvania. John, thanks for calling. You're on the air. Hello, John.
Hi.
Yes, go ahead.
It's apparent by listening to what you guys are saying that the police and the social workers and these people use the fear tactic in a very large way. Is there any place that parents could kind of get a heads up on that kind of stuff ahead of time? Some place where they can learn a little bit about the laws, or I don't know, they probably would change from state to state, but it seems like there would be some place where parents could get some kind of an idea of how to combat it ahead of time.
Well, I wasn't thinking of this earlier, but I've actually produced a DVD series on the Constitution, and you can go on the internet to constitutionreclaimed.org, and there's 25 episodes in it, but one of the 3 episodes that I put up so that people can watch it for free are on the constitutional rights of parents. And so that would be a good, it's about a 30-minute lecture, multimedia lecture on parents' rights. So go to constitutionreclaimed.com and watch the parents' rights video. It's me teaching 30 minutes of law on the subject.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. My kids are grown up and gone, but we teach little kids at church, and it's heartbreaking to see what the kids are going through nowadays. And I want to thank you for all you're doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the call from Pennsylvania here today. Let's go next to Milwaukee. And Jason, you're on the air.
Oh, hello. Nice to talk to you. I was calling in, actually, because I volunteer with a medical clinic, and I work in a lab, actually, that administers the hepatitis A and B vaccine, which I understand is what caused this ridiculous case to happen. And I wanted to strongly agree with your guest, for one, that it's completely wrong-headed that anybody would respond this way. We have people, millions of people in this country right now that are in their 40s and 50s and 60s that have never been vaccinated for hepatitis, and they're not required to be. It's not considered to be an emergency situation. It's, strongly advised, but, we automatically started vaccinating kids for this, I think, in the late 80s, but we have a lot of people around my age, for example, that have never been vaccinated. So, to me, it just seems completely outrageous that, we have millions and millions of people that are not required to get the vaccine yet. Plus it also takes 6 months, I might add, for those shots, at least in adults, to take full effect. So there's no crisis situation that I can see. But I also had a question for your guest, if he's still available.
Sure, go ahead.
And that is, regarding the Parental Rights Act, I have seen out of the Obama administration that the nutritional guidelines now are starting to change in our school. And some of it seems rather benign. Kids have to drink 2% milk and that sort of thing. But what I'm curious about from your guest is, I just have a hunch, knowing the government as I do, that, in 10 or 20 years, this is probably a precursor to eventually parents being told, well, now we have to serve food in our public schools that conforms to strict Muslim nutritional guidelines, and your children will have to eat it. And I was just wondering if he can shed any light on if the Parental Rights Act might eventually involve today's nutritional guidelines in schools.
The Parental Rights Amendment would have this effect on nutritional questions. Parents would get to make the choices for their child. It would only be I read this about a situation in England where a mom literally fed her daughter nothing but chicken nuggets for like 15 years. She was 17 years old and collapsed from malnutrition. If you do something like that, you're going to have legal problems, and you should have legal problems if you're that crazy in the way you feed or don't feed your children. But absent something where the child is really, truly in imminent harm, parents get to make the nutritional decisions for their kids. And the idea that the government should be able to decide these things, and whether it's forcing you into a Muslim diet or anything else, the principle is parents should get to make these decisions, not government officials.
Michael,
and that's what the amendment would accomplish.
Isn't a suburb in Chicago one of the school districts, I don't recall which one right now, but forbade students from bringing sack lunches to school, requiring them to eat the school menu because we know how to feed your children better than parents do?
Yeah, there was a case about that. For some reason, it sticks in my mind that was in North Carolina, but
two separate issues.
Okay, all right, but it's crazy. The idea that macaroni and cheese is boiled spinach is so good for everybody is I'm not buying it. Give me the sandwich, the banana, and the cookie anytime, and I think the kids will turn out a lot better. Parents should make these kind of decisions. This is not something that's a cute life or death thing. Those kind of nutritional decisions are cumulative over a long time, and if we think that the government has to control 3 meals a day so that kids, become nutritionally fit, we're just not a free country anymore. That's the bottom line. Free countries don't do this kind of stuff.
Jason, let me just ask you this: as you work in the medical field in this regard, has there ever been a situation that you have encountered in which such drastic measures has been taken as what has been outlined here in the state of Pennsylvania?
No, not at all. In fact, with adults, what we have to do before they're vaccinated for A and B is we have to often run a titer to check their blood work to see if they've ever been exposed, and then if they have no resistance or immunity, that's when the vaccinations are administered. And it takes, again, I have to highlight, it takes 6 months, at least in an adult. Now, I don't work with infants, but it takes 6 months in an adult for those shots to even take full effect. So to me, and like I said also before, there are millions of Americans that are older that were not automatically vaccinated. So, we also had cases where people have actively had it and that sort of thing, and yes, we promptly put them in treatment, but we never, ever have, I've never, ever seen anything like this, and it's just a sad thing that our government has gotten to the point where they even felt empowered to do it.
Jason, thank you for your call here today. To Olivet, South Dakota. Bob, you're on the air.
Hello.
Hi there.
Yeah. Oh, my question, my comment is the newborn baby had jaundice, and I'm thinking it might have just came from the hepatitis shot.
It could have, and so when the parents had control, the baby was doing fine. When the doctors quote unquote took over, that's when the baby developed jaundice, and so
right.
Who knows? We've had a number of doctors contacting us once the news went out about this, and we've got some real experts are lining up now to help us out, and that's a good thing for us to explore. So thanks for the tip on it.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Bob.
Bye.
Our number is 800-733-9829. Roger, you're our next caller. Go ahead. You're on the air.
Yes, this is Roger, and my daughter was living with one guy, and the father of her first daughter called the cops and reported that the daughters had been molested. and the cops came with social service and took her 2 daughters away from her. I mean, social service is getting way too much power there. They didn't even listen to any reasoning or nothing, and they had my granddaughters go up and take exam by the doctors, and my daughter wanted to go with them, and the social service had a police officer come out and get my daughter to go down and talk to the cops so she wouldn't be able to go and be with her daughters when they were being examined.
Okay. Michael, are cases like this on the increase, too, across the country? I mean, at times, and this is the dilemma, because at times there is abuse that is going on.
The question in a case like this is, what's the quality of the evidence that the wrongdoing was made? We had a case where it was very similar allegations, where it was the grandfather claiming he called in and reported his daughter, who was married and had a family, and his son, who was married and had another, of a different family, but they lived about 5 miles apart. He reported that both of the men in the family were sexually abusing the kids. Well, the social workers came out, and on the first day, they did a very intensive investigation and did stuff to the kids that was unspeakable in my mind. Mm-hmm. But they found out in the course of that the grandfather was actually under a court order because he was mentally unbalanced, and there had been a court order issued ordering him to stay away from both families, that a judge had actually found the guy was unbalanced. So, you think, okay, that's the end of it. No. The next day, they came, the same social workers, knowing it's the same grandfather, knowing that he's under this court order, came and do the same exact thing to the second family.
Oh, my.
And so, if they had quality evidence that the child was being sexually abused, that'd be one thing. But they knew good and well it wasn't. So, obviously neither of us know the situation that the callers just described, what the quality of the evidence is, but that's the legal difference is when they have quality evidence, verifiable evidence, that's one thing. The social workers need to do their job. The police need to do their job when they've got quality evidence. But on these rumors whispered into hotlines, 2/3 of the cases in the country that are called into a hotline turn out to be absolutely bogus. And so we've created this police state atmosphere with these hotlines where people are, and yet some people are afraid to hotline real stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of the kids that end up with really serious problems and dying, social workers knew it. They knew what was going along. And as long as you play the game with the social workers and act like you're going along with your jurisdiction, they'll let you have a lot of leeway. But if you stand up for your rights, even if they have no evidence whatsoever, they'll crush you. They'll try to crush you at least. And so it's the most backward system. It's all about social worker power in the end, and very, very badly managed if your real goal was to help kids.
Our number is 800-733-9829. Have a couple open lines again. Sue in Hermiston, Oregon, you're on the air.
Thank you, and thank you, America, for all our godly doctors. It was only by the grace of God that this young woman, first of all, the pressure she was brought under for upping her blood pressure, and then sitting out in a car in a parking lot, that she didn't bleed to death, because by the time they would have discovered that she was hemorrhaging and even got help, I believe she would have been dead. I believe that was only by the grace of God that mother is alive.
Are you talking about this specific case in Pennsylvania?
Yes, sir.
Well, Michael, there was no hemorrhaging going on, was there?
Well, no, I think what the caller is saying is that if she'd started hemorrhaging...
Oh, I see.
Yes, sir.
Which is, of course, a possibility the day you've given birth. I just want to say to the caller that she's in Hermiston, which is just right across the river from where I grew up in Kennewick, Washington. Oh. So it's good to hear from my home.
Great. Thank you, Sue, for your call. We're going to be back in just 1 minute. Our number here to Crosstalk with Michael Farris for the final segment, 800-733-9829. If you call now, you can get on board, 800-733-9829.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. In August of 2010, Glenn Beck held his Restoring Honor rally in Washington, D.C. that included the unveiling of the Black Robe Regiment, a group of clergy from all religions, including imams, according to FoxNews.com. In the summer of 2011, it was his Restoring Courage rally in Israel that also had an ecumenical flair, I believe. And in the summer of 2012, it will be his next rally, Restoring Love. Will this Restoring Love rally be about embracing ecumenicalism and the social gospel? Will Restoring Love mean we are to set aside theological and doctrinal issues in order to win the culture war? I believe more and more Christians who refuse to compromise on what it means to be a Christian, who refuse to compromise on the gospel, who defend theological lines, are indeed going to be called unloving. But indeed, that's the most loving thing we can do.
Folks, check out the story and share it with others, too. HSLDA.org, and you'll see it there in their news items. People across this country need to know what's going on, and this case in Pennsylvania certainly is an outrage to so many. We're talking today with Michael Farris from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association that has taken this case and pursuing action at this point. And what are you seeking with your action, Michael?
Well, we're seeking money damages, and that's how you do it. I mean, I was talking to a fellow lawyer the other day. He said, we used to beat people with shovels, and we don't do that anymore. We go to court, and we sue for money damages, and the point of the money damages is, yes, to compensate this family, but it's really to teach a lesson to the hospital and the doctors and to the system as a whole. You can't do this to people. It's the way that we have for telling them they did the wrong thing and they got to stop it. So that's our real goal, is to get them to stop this kind of stuff and to respect other parents in the future.
Our next call in Port Charlotte, Florida, and Bob, you're on the air.
Yes, I'm a Baptist preacher. I used to live out in Nevada. And I fought these battles all my life. I have 5 kids; they're all adults now. Every time I fought the battle, I always get myself a lawyer, and they accused me of malnutrition of my children because of the way we fed our children. And the last one happened in Hawthorne, Nevada, and they actually came to like a SWAT, like the gang of thugs. Down our house, and we actually had our children farmed out all across Nevada with Christian families. I went down to Las Vegas, had to find the most God-fearing redneck lawyer I could get, and I went back to the church and told them next time they're trying to steal my baby, they're not going to steal my baby. I went next day. I called Carson City, and they said, "We're looking for you." And I told them the terms. The terms are you meet my doctor, and my we had a second opinion, a doctor's second opinion, and my lawyer, and my whole family meet you in Las Vegas. That's the terms. They called me back soon. It's Mr. McDuffie. We made a horrible mistake, and we're out of this. Well, the bottom line is that the people lost their jobs. They're relocated. The head of the local HRS at that time have relocated, and people actually got fired. And then he came out to visit me because I wrote a column that was published in the newspaper across Nevada.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Bob. We're not going into all the details here, but Michael, again, pointing out just even standing up to that phone call or to the social worker coming is something that this caller is pointing out here.
It is. If people know their rights, and if they have the ability to engage a lawyer who knows this area of the law. They should do it. This is an area where you will, get run over if you don't know what you're doing. When I was, in fact, the very first case I ever took as a young lawyer was where a family went into the social workers because they were having trouble with the boy bedwetting. He's like 3, and they asked for advice, and they ended up, the social workers ended up taking custody of the child over that. It took like 2 years to get that child back to the family. These people simply think that parents are incompetent, and my view is the government is presumptively incompetent, not the parents. Sometimes the government does some good, but there's just so much abuse. The abuse versus good stuff ratio is just way out of line, and we need to get it turned around. We need to have the government, get involved in those cases where they have real evidence of real problems, and leave everybody else alone.
Let's get to Johnson City, Tennessee. Ginger, you're on the air.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the gentleman that was speaking before about the social workers. They have extremely a large amount of power in what they do and what they say. Usually the court, they are a supposedly a liaison for children. I was a liaison for children. And a lot of times you can convince the child what you want him to be convinced as. They went primarily on what at the time my husband looked like. He had long hair. It was gray. He had a beard. And the girl claimed rape. He spent 23 years in prison with no DNA. They will not take out his record, and he still has to sign as a sex offender. I don't understand how they can get away with it.
Well, they get away with it whenever the government abuses our rights. And obviously I don't know the facts of your case well enough to know all the totality, but whenever the government abuses our rights, ultimately it's because the people don't stand up for it. One of the founding fathers said that an enlightened people will never allow that which was intended for their liberty to become an instrument of tyranny. Well, we've allowed our government to become an instrument of tyranny because people haven't paid attention to what's going on, and they haven't known their rights, and they haven't known the Constitution. And so, I would encourage people, I hadn't thought about this, but to go to my ConstitutionReclaimed.com website and look at the Constitution series, because we need to have people that are enlightened on the Constitution of the United States and stand up for what they believe in.
Thank you for your call. I'm going to squeeze in Sharon here from Racine, Wisconsin. You're on the air.
Hi. I just want to make a comment on the woman that had called earlier about our system with this Child Protective Services. Our families had to deal with them a couple of times, and I'm telling you, they better start praying. They better get their lives right because they're dealing with children being abused, and it's just not right that the children aren't properly, being listened to, and the mothers are, like my daughter is a good mother. I've been, talking to her about God and everything, and she's a good mom. And we had to go through some things, and the system, they just don't care. They'd rather listen to, in the last days it says right will be wrong. Well,
Sharon, I appreciate your call here. I'm out of time. Michael Farris is our guest here today, and I guess we're hearing many, many such cases around the country. But, Michael, people need to become informed. You've got a couple websites, if you'd rehearse those sites.
Sure.
And if those people want more information about joining up with HSLDA, how they can do that as well.
Okay. Well, to get information about this specific case in Pennsylvania and to support it and about homeschooling, the web is hslda.org, which is homeschoollegaldefenseassociation.org. If they want to get involved with the political effort to put parents' rights into the text of the Constitution, which all of this whole program has proven that that's necessary, they should go to parentalrights.org. And then finally, if they want to learn about the Constitution, they can learn about my new Constitution series that I've recorded on DVD at ConstitutionReclaimed.com.
Well, Michael, I appreciate you and the efforts at HSLDA bringing us aware of this case, for your taking it on by faith. I know a lot of support is needed in order for you to litigate this, and we thank you for being involved, and thanks for bringing it to our attention today.
Thank you, Jim.
Michael Farris with us today from the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Thanks for joining us today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.